Here we go. So we have Maria Wheatley, Sarah Adams, and we have Thomas Sheridan. So give them a big hand of... Yes. Which one of you would like to start? Thomas?
What am I to do? Are you answering questions? Is that what's happening?
No, that one's for after.
So what do I do now?
So we're going to all have a chat between ourselves.
Oh, okay.
Subjects.
Okay, this is new. Okay, so I asked you a question, right?
Yes, you can ask, yes, me a question if you want.
I wasn't expecting this, okay? But I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm not being politically correct. Is there a misogyny in the alternative scene? And I am starting shit. Have you experienced that, either one of you? You don't have to name names, but I've often wondered that.
You can go.
No, you can go.
You know, I've experienced some very weird stuff in our field of work. Definitely sexual harassment from people I never expected it from. You know, bullying, just which I stand up against. And maybe, you know, a lot of people that sort of argue when I think it's absolutely ridiculous. On this, I don't... Here you go.
Well, close to mouth. Right. Well, sadly, I think, you know, that the subject of Earth mysteries has been male-dominated for many years. It's taken me, for example, a lot of time and effort to open up these doors for me to be able to speak and to reveal my research. Unfortunately, I have known some con men in Earth mysteries that I've ended up working for, never got paid for, had equipment taken, and felt very, very threatened before. So, but that said, you know, I feel that the voices that we have, like people like Sarah and myself, it gives me even more passion to not open the door, but to try and kick it in. And say, you know, listen to an alternative voice, because it's not all about the goddess, it's not all about the god. It's about working together to change humanity and the world. So I say yes. I've been. I don't like using the word victim because I'm a very passionate woman with a good yang energy. But yes, it has happened. But together we can change a lot of things. And I think for my daughter's sake, then so we should, because she is entering a male environment as well. So, but she kicks ass.
And I'd like to add to that a little bit more. I was sexually harassed by a well-known author in this field. Also, you know, people who claim to be religious and so on. It was an awful thing, and they made pages against me. They just were absolutely horrible, and they had some weird, I guess, obsession or whatever. But have I experienced equality? I do believe so. A lot of my work was stolen. I did a lot of work about soul consciousness. I did a lot of work about lower consciousness. This was all stolen from me because I was deemed as the pretty girl who, you know, probably wasn't great to speak to audiences. And I was even sent messages where they called me stupid little girl and told me to shut up when I started speaking out about my work being stolen from me. There's a person who directly took my work and are selling a supplement on it that, you know, they've twisted all of my work into something absolutely horrible. This very person, when they approached me, it was harassment. They basically told me that, you know, you have issues and I can only save you and all this stuff. And I immediately pushed this person away from me. And I, you know, then saw they were being promoted everywhere. And they had stolen my work after treating me like that. And because they were, you know, very good at speaking, I guess, and maybe older than me, and I was considered maybe pretty stupid girl or something from the messages I got, it was okay. It was okay that my work was stolen. And that's something that in the future that I will not allow happen again. I was battling against that and battling to try to say, hey, there's this unfairness happening to me. There's people in this area who are not being good to me. And it's very hard to say that, considering these people, they also have mass amount of followings, and they're getting away with being just evil towards some of us women in there. But I definitely have taken quite a stand at them, and I will be doing a documentary on bullying and on this sort of stuff in the future, and it's something that I plan on coming out entirely with.
Just adding to that, when I first came into, when I became aware of these kind of scenes about 10 years ago, you look around, and I was hearing a lot of these women saying, I'm a goddess workshop, goddess this. And at the time, I was like, it's like, what? Could you imagine a guy walking around saying, oh, I'm a god? It has a totally different connotation. Then you understand the ego aspect of that, the narcissism. But then I thought about it more. And if you look at non-Abrahamic religions, a lot of them, like the Vedic religion and a lot of the Indo-European religions, the whole idea was for an ordinary person to achieve a state of godhood, which is different than saying I'm a god or I'm a goddess. But now I see that maybe the women saying this, and I'm not saying all of them, I'm saying a certain type who are grounded and have done the work, maybe they're ahead of the fellas in the game because they've actually broken that Abrahamic spell better than the fellas have, because the fellas are, they're not as emotionally out there. They don't embrace things like that so quickly. But I think maybe there is something to that. Like when we were going around everywhere, you kept talking about it. And then I started to realize it's probably a good thing, because it ties in with lots of spiritual traditions, all of them actually, except the Abrahamic one, that your place on this planet is to attain some kind of godhead, because the opposite of that is a demon. So you've got, it forces, like if there's a God in the sky and that's the end of it and just one, that doesn't force you to do anything other than be a better slave. But if you can actually take that responsibility inside yourself, that I have this, what's the word? Condition, I don't mean a medical, but like a sort of this conditional relationship, my consciousness, to develop it further. Well, all of a sudden you're doing the work then. You're working on it rather than expecting it to come from someone else. So I actually think the whole thing of the goddess thing, it depends on how it's said and who's saying it. But I actually think in many cases it's actually a good thing. So I would definitely, I have Maria to thank for that, especially because you made me see that. But yeah, I think it's like everything else, terms become corrupted. They become corrupted, and your relationship with that term is what really changes it. So that's what I like to say. Thank you.
So, and that's my whole thing, is that even in Christian religion, if you look at Christ was about you becoming your own pilot, you becoming your God self. And this is why back then the religions of that day hated Christ too, because he was saying all the power is within yourself, and that you can manifest miracles, you can heal others, you can do all these amazing things because, well, he stated he was the Son of God, he was saying he was God on earth, a God on earth. And this is something back in that day that they just absolutely disliked, because this was empowering to people. And everything was, even back in that day, about taking away the power. When it comes to the whole goddess thing, I can say, since I was a young child, that I had Diana come to me. When I was a very young child, I was in France, and I had Diana come to me, and she said she was protecting me. And, she's helped me throughout many, many years. And even when I was quite sick and people around me were having visions of the goddess Diana, she was saying that she was protecting me. I do believe that, Yes, us women, sometimes we are definitely into our emotions a lot more than men. This is evident. And we sometimes listen to them in a lot of cases more than men do. Men seem to, specifically in society, they think they have to be tough and not listen to their emotions and, adhere to a certain sort of type that's been put out there. And I do believe that takes away from power. I know in the United States, by working with men there, that they are very disconnected from their emotions. It's as if they don't care. They are trying to live up to this image that's portrayed, and it's absolutely sad because then they can't connect to anybody. And a lot of them are in terrible emotional states, and they're not in control of themselves. They're not in their power. And I see how, specifically in media in the United States, it's about taking your power away from you and making you feel subservient. And specifically with men, they are very quite targeted in the United States. And unless you're a guy who shoots up steroids and looks all buff and is, basically that's the whole image they have over there, well, you're just worthless. And you better not listen to your emotions over there. And this is why in the United States, most men have the issue of saying, I love you. Most American men, and I've encountered this speaking to couples and everything. It's quite sad. They cannot even say, I love you. It's hard for them to say, I love you.
Well, Sarah was talking about a disconnect, with guys, in America. And one thing I found, I grew up in America, and that's why I ended up at Monk's Mount, Serpent Mound, in the Cahokia that I was talking about. But I feel the disconnect is one step further. I think we're disconnected from the earth. I think we're completely disconnected. And that's where, someone like me with going around sort of ancient sites, I really suddenly feel a connection at these places. And when we were talking about the goddess earlier, and there's a fantastic island in the Mediterranean, it's Malta, and even in sort of old Maltese language, there's no word for father, it's the land of the goddess. And I think our ancient ancestors kind of made us connect to these places, and I know Thomas made a big connection in Sardinia, didn't you, at one site, for example, where you do suddenly make these connections. But it's easy to connect to the earth. We can just kick off our shoes, as we know, do a bit of grounding, then suddenly we feel this connection again. So I feel this is the time where we can do that. And it's very important for us to meet up face to face and get to know each other like this, because there's a disconnect because of Facebook. Sometimes my daughter's more concerned about changing her profile picture and how many likes she's going to get than her real friend that lives just down the road. So I feel there's a reconnection with these grassroots talks that Sarah and Taj have put on as well. So we can all kind of join the dots like this and connect to one another. And I'm looking at your faces and directly understanding things, I think, when we meet together like this. So I thank you all for coming and for listening, because this is what it's about: changing information, making contacts, and moving forward in our lives.
That experience as our dinner was awful for me, but this is the whole thing. I'm glad you brought that up. I did an event in America recently, and they're still hung up on the idea that our spiritual experience is some kind of positive thing. And a friend of mine out there who's he's sort of like a hillbilly shaman type, a great guy, and his attitude was, he'd ask a person, have you ever had a spiritual experience? And if they say yes, and he says, was it horrible? And they say no, he says, you never had a spiritual experience. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to that, because and it's also because of commercial reasons, they're always, the sort of new age idea of spiritualism is basically a side product of the psychiatric industry. This notion that you're supposed to be happy all the time, happiness all the time. But that's not, that's like I said, say earlier on, that becomes a volcano of shadow inside you that eventually explodes to the surface. Let me tell you the most spiritual experience, and the most spiritual and profound thing I ever heard anyone say in my life. I was in a train station in Ireland, and there was an American tourist was complaining to the porter, to the station guard, that the trains were late. why do you bother having timetables? And the guy in the train station said, sure, if you didn't have timetables, we wouldn't know how late the trains were. And that is profound. Just think about that. That is a deeply profound way of looking at reality. Instead of being dominated by the dysfunctionality of a situation, you see it as a kind of a holistic understanding of reality. And that a holistic understanding of reality is what liberates you from control. You know, one of the saddest things in my life is to see my country demolished by the European Union. 10 years ago, it was great. It was like everyone was corrupt, everyone was a gangster. But it was tremendous freedom. You know, if you wanted cable TV and it cost 200, you just threw the guy 20 and you got the box and the cable for free. And victimless crime was, you know, was how we survived and how we thrived, and we were very happy with that. And the EU discovered that if you put in regulations and you threaten to take people to court, and it killed that. And the EU did to Ireland what the Vikings, the Normans, and the British Empire couldn't, and that's some statement. And how did they do it? By bureaucracy. And that's why I hate bureaucracy. I hate bureaucratic ways of doing things. And that's why I'm delighted that Trump is the President of the United States. And I'll tell you why. He's Loki, he's Lucifer, he's Dunbar, he is the fly in the ointment. I totally agree with Johnny Lydon. I'm not saying he's a great guy or he's got all the solutions, but anything that makes politicians and the mass media terrified is all right in my books. And I think people need to wake up to that. And I've noticed that's created a fracture in reality. Oh, he's a big evil man, oh, you know, this kind of thing. And I said, look how he has everyone terrified. That's the beauty of that. It doesn't matter what his solutions are. What he's done right now is he's disrupted the control system by wrecking their agenda.
He's the antidote to Russell Brand.
You see, Niall is right. Everybody thought that I got news for you, and this is going to shock some of you, but it's true. Guess what the Great Awakening is? Brexit and Donald Trump. Who said salvation comes in Russell Brand on a unicorn with rainbow shooting out of his arse? Who told you to expect that? The control system. Who told you? What did you get? A disruptive force. What we got was the lightning bolt hitting the tarot card in the tarot. Indra, Dunner, Lucifer, Loki. And I am loving every minute of it. I love seeing politicians terrified. I love seeing them all afraid what to do around them. I love to see the media terrified. And they push out all these things like he's racist and all this. It's not true. He's no more. It's not. You just look at, there's no history of that. I mean, I lived in New York. He has thousands of people of colour and gay people working for him. And always had. And they loved him in New York until he became president. Now, what does that tell you? He's got nothing to lose. He took a salary of president at $1 a year. That's what he got paid. And the media just reports the negative stuff. My attitude is the more damage he does, the better it is for us, because he's given us a respite to actually help ourselves in between. And the same thing with Brexit. I think Brexit's the same thing as well. Everybody in Ireland loves Brexit. They want our exit. They want it. But if you look at the mainstream media, it's just like the same Trump thing. Oh, Ireland is going to be destroyed by Brexit. A hard border is coming in. I live on the border. I can't wait for smuggling to come back.
Well, one thing is America has to change. And this is, recently I was called to go to a community that houses elderly people and even people who are handicapped veterans. And these people, they're getting a certain amount to pay their rents, if that. Most veterans, most elderly people don't get any help in the United States, and that's quite a sad thing. I was called to this establishment and asked to speak to the heads that ran it, because they are bullying these people. They're bullying handicapped people and elderly people. And these people have no money to pay for food. None whatsoever. They can barely pay for their rent each month in this establishment. And in the United States, just because of the downfall of the economy and a lot of stuff, there's a lot of issues happening. the apartment places are getting broken into. There's a lot of unsafe places in the United States right now. And I was there as a little girl, and even some years ago, I recently got back to the United States last year, but some years ago, and I never had seen this happen before. And, just having these people reach out to me and say, hey, these people are so cruel. They won't let us feed the cats. They won't, if the one lady, she had her son who was autistic, stay there a couple of days, and they made her get rid of him. And then they were just, they were bullying them on every single level. And this is sort of really quite sad, because I have to go myself, this is some of the work that I do, and try to get it that, people who just deserve, a bit of compassion and empathy and caring, that they get treated okay. And people in the United States right now are quite suffering, whether it's children in school systems, whether it's the veterans, whether it's the elderly. On every single level, people are quite suffering in the United States. So for there, it does have to change on every single level. It no longer is a country that is, very advanced, I think. You guys think that you don't have freedom here. You have a lot more freedom here than you do in the United States, I assure you that. You have a lot more help here than you do in the United States. You can get housing, you can get food, there's a lot of things that in the United States. It's yes, on every single level, and I will be returning to the United States, where I will help out my group who gives out tents to people. These people are dying in the streets. I remember doing this last year, and we do it before the cold front comes in. We get the tents, we get the soup, and we go and we carry them and put them in tents and give them blankets, give them hot soup. And they are even turned away at hospitals. Even if they're dying and they go into hospitals, they are turned away. They will prefer to let them die on the street. And this happens every single year in the United States on a mass scale. And you see all these churches in the United States that are very, very wealthy. And you see poor people sleeping at night at the doors of these churches. And if we open the doors of these churches, we would have the ability to house every homeless person in the United States, and they would not be dying of cold at night. And it's quite sad of how the United States has descended. So I will be returning there and helping out my group to, sort of help give tents and things like that. And even my group who does this, they have had issues with the police. The police have often been unkind to them. And last year when we were trying to serve Thanksgiving dinners to everybody, the police sent the police in. The police were very, there was not a nice presence from them. And it's just, for me at least, I'm happy that there's some sort of change that's going to go on in the future, and there's change going on now, because if it stays this way, I'm really worried about the United States.
Wow, poor people. It's got to stop. That really has. It's just so sad that people are suffering. It really does break my heart. There's an author called Jude Currivan. She wrote a fantastic book about the karma of countries. It's called Hope, Heal Our Earth and People. And she looked at United States and Ireland. So I'm trying to look for links here. And she looked at United States and Ireland, and she felt that the reason why some of the people in America are suffering from obesity and from other kind of health issues was deep, deep karma from the time where they had to leave Ireland in the potato famine. So they have that kind of in their kind of karma, and now they're kind of overeaten and they're getting very unbalanced. So Jude was saying to really heal the problems of a country, we need to have a look at the karma. I think it's on like both levels. You've got to be practical, but I feel by sometimes understanding the spirituality of the people, what's kind of ingrained in them, is a way of kind of balancing it holistically to move forward. But it's about empowering people. It goes back to us at some point saying no, no, no. And here's the thing about universities these days. You know what? back in my day, in the sort of late 70s and the 80s when I left school, the Coleman, it was coal not dole, you know, and we had a bit of balls about us to stop things, yeah? And we would go out and we would try and do something. Universities today are a bit different. In fact, my daughter, I mean, she kind of hopefully follows in her mum's footsteps, but her lecturer said in Bristol, all of the NHS drop-in centres have been privatised and owned by Virgin, yeah? Virgin are taking over our National Health Service. And so the lecturer said to Raven's class, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to get out on the streets? Are you going to say no, no, no? And they said, we might make a Facebook page, yeah? We might have a kind of think about that, but, you know, how can we stop that? Do we go to 38 degrees? And the lecturer actually started to lecture them about being rebellious. It's kind of being kicked out of them because they're so getting in debt that they're kind of fearful. So I feel the one thing that I can do, not just as a mother, but as something, is try and motivate people to say, no, this is the end, it has to stop, whether that's in America, and galvanize our young people to have a bit more balls than just talking on Facebook.
I'd like to add to that, you know, I see so many Facebook warriors and so many social media warriors, and then they complain about everything in the book and they're not out there doing anything. And this is a huge problem. If all of these people that were, say, you know, arguing over small, ridiculous things were out there helping out the world, we would have a much better world. But no, I think, in a way, saying on Facebook something like, or sharing a charity page or something, and they think that they've done something to really help out, when it's almost like an instant gratification thing, and they're registering it as they have helped out, when really, truly, they haven't. It's a good way to feel good about yourself because, hey, I can share a charity or this, and I can get away with actually going out and doing it. So that is something that I wish to see in, you know, with people, that they'd actually get out there and start helping other people out, because that's where a lot of change is going to come from, specifically in the United States. You know, it's overwhelming of how many people need help over there on every single level. You know, it really changes you seeing people dying in the streets from cold, and you have to pick them up. And I remember this one man we found, he was literally dying, and that was very, very much has sort of really affected me, that I want to devote most of my time in helping out with the homeless and helping encourage people to get involved in helping each other, specifically in the United States. This is one of my passions.
That's a good one you brought up with charity. You know what the best way to help people would be? To destroy charitable organizations, because that's the biggest scam on this planet. There's numerous homeless charities in Ireland and everywhere. I give money to people on the streets. I give them cash right there. I don't care if they spend it on drink or drugs. It's none of my business. It's not a contract, it's a gift. If a bottle of whiskey gets them through a hurt toothache, or gets them through a cold, or gets them to stop them from dying of hypothermia overnight, good, I'm glad he did it like that, or she did it like that. Corporate charity is one of the most evil and psychopathic things on this planet. You have this situation at the moment where you're supposed to grow a beard or a moustache for November to help men with cancer, right? Now that money doesn't go to anyone to help anyone with cancer. That money goes to research. What's research? Big pharmaceutical corporations testing drugs on animals, big universities that are already flushed with cash in places like Cambridge and in the United States, and they get tons of money, and it's just and then they will eventually develop some kind of drug that will be replaced by another drug because it's not good enough, and that drug will be sold back to the people who are sick at phenomenal profits. You give money to cancer research, what you're doing is guaranteeing that future people suffering from cancer will be made bankrupt and their families bankrupt, because the medications, that money is going to be converted that's an investment in the big pharma that comes back at high expensive drugs that's passed on to the people or the taxpayer, depending on the system you live in. before it even gets to that point, it pays for enormous salaries. You're talking about the average big charity in Ireland, you're talking 200-300 grand a year. I don't know what it is here. Company cars, downtown, posh offices in high rent parts of Dublin. They get done over every year. Big bonuses at Christmas, fancy Christmas party. Fact-finding missions to Bali, where there just so happens to be a championship golf course. This is charity. Organised charity is pure evil. If you know someone who has cancer, give them cash, give them money, help them out, drive them to the hospital. If you know an old person down the road, ask them, do you need anything from the shops, milk or anything. Don't give money to help the aged or any of these groups. If you see a child being abused, you report it to the police. You don't go on the BBC and give money to a teddy bear with one eye. And these are the kind of things that go on. And I would say, if you want to help people, charity, organised charity. Now, there's a lot of really good people who work in these organised charities at the ground level. Their hearts are in the right place, they mean well. But at the top, it's a big scam for rich people to cream off the donations, and what's left, it gets thrown to a big pharma company or a university. It's like, I have asthma, and there's a guy outside a supermarket in my village, and he's selling Irish Asthma Association, and I'd say, give me the money. And then he says, no, I'll help. How will I help? Research. What's research? Big pharma profits. In fact, some pharmaceutical companies even do their accounting based on the money that's going to come in from charitable donations. And so do some universities. So that's the kind of scam you're dealing with. And what's it preying upon? People who are sick, living on the streets or have some other disability. And that's, to me, I can't imagine anything more wicked than that. It's like if, God forbid, if one of you were sick and I became your personal representative and someone wanted to have a conversation with you and say, how are the pains in your legs? Hold on a second, pay me a £5 and I'll tell you. That's what big charity is.
What's interesting is all of the billions of dollars that we sent to these third world countries, and this year it's said that we have the largest humanitarian crisis of, in recent history. And that's ridiculous considering all this, quote, money that was being funneled over there, which were billions and billions of dollars. Yet we still have, it's got worse. And if all that money had went to giving food, building shelters and stuff like that, we wouldn't have the world's largest humanitarian crisis happening this year. So that money is being scammed off. And I do believe that a lot of charities do scam off money on every single level. And it's better just to go ahead and buy groceries for poor families that are in need. I used to do it. I would take time out and just go ahead and buy a certain amount of groceries, put those out in bags, and go to these neighborhoods where I knew that people really needed it, and just knock on the doors and, go ahead and deliver them the groceries. And I remember just how happy they were. It's much better to do that than to give to any charity.
Well, I'm going to move from charity to museums. Yeah, because as much as we have, things hidden by charities, be that money, what on earth are our museums hiding from us? Yeah, what's the Smithsonian Institute got in their archives? Yeah, well, who were the people? Why are they being housed in places like Cambridge and Oxford and the Smithsonian Institute? So I think the kind of history of humanity is being kept from us. Yeah? And I think it's being kept from us because not a lot of people know that you can actually access these places. You can go to any museum. You can say, I want to see an artifact, but you have to have the catalogue number. That's the only bit of a downer. So when I went to find out about, for example, the elongated skull of Stonehenge, that woman, I found, after much ado, the catalogue number, and it was in a building that was twice the size of this, and all down one side was just cardboard boxes with the male or female Mars or, Venus symbol, say male or female, Abydos, the Egyptian skulls at Cambridge University. And I took a photograph of that because it was shocking. And then the other side goes Stonehenge, and I couldn't even see to the other side. And these boxes were going up like 2 stories. And they haven't even been seen. Nobody goes to these places. They're not even catalogued properly. And the shocking thing was, when I went to Cambridge University, for example, I expected it to be high-tech because you went through these really plush glass doors that kind of closed. The woman clicked in and put her swipe card down. And then said, could you sign in? And as I've explained before, you signed in by handwriting and then looking at a ticket like a library kid book I had when I was in the 70s. And it was on there. And I feel the more that we question, the more that we go to our local museums and say, what have you got? What have you got? And just go in there and start asking. And then I feel we can get to our history. And when we find out where we've come from, we can find out where we're going to. So I think it's, charities are corrupt. Museums are just as corrupt. And also, we could always say with religion, wouldn't you like to have a little mooch around in those little Vatican places and see what artifacts are in there? I know I would.
Let's face it, religions are failing humanity on every single level anyhow.
What you're saying about what's in museums, I'm working on the new book again, and I'm become very interested in recent years in these Irish round towers. I don't know if you know about them, but there's about 100 of them, or 72 of them in Ireland. They don't make any sense. They were told when we were growing up that they were Christian towers, that the door was, so many meters off the ground so they could run in there when the Vikings attacked. And, apparently the Vikings didn't have fire and couldn't burn them out. But I come to the conclusion that they're pre-Christian. They're probably built by the last pagan religion of Ireland, which was the Crom Cruach, which was the last pagan god. And the main body of evidence is that they're built using Roman mortar. The mortar from Rome, which was mixed with cow's blood, hay and mud. And the assumption is that the ancient Irish pagans didn't have ships and couldn't sail to Roman Britain or Roman Europe and learn these techniques and bring them back to Ireland. That somehow they could only learn seafaring if they had a crucifix around their neck. So as I studied this more and more, I came to discover an individual. I won't name his name yet because I'm still trying to prise information out of his ex-students. He died in 2012, and he was basically the god of Irish antiquities. And he was a Jesuit and a Christian fanatic. And he was part of a continuum to make sure that nothing that was impressive, other than stuff they couldn't call Christian, like Newgrange and so on, was to make sure if anything from, say, the last 2,000 years, it was all Christian. They moved the dates forward to say it was all Christians who built it. The Christians came to Ireland and they taught the Irish how to build. This kind of thing. And I have actual papers that he was giving classes in university, and there's a very interesting, there's loads of swastikas around Ireland on stones. Swastika is an ancient European symbol of the sun. That's where the St. Bridget's cross comes from, and it was one of them. But there's real swastikas all over these standing stones in Ireland. And he said that he actually said in the university paper that they were crucifixes to celebrate the glory of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, this was a university professor who was blatantly pushing his own religious fanaticism and zealotry. And I caught him out. I got tapes of his lecture, and he said everything square is Roman and Christian, everything round is pagan. The pagans and the Celtic people and all the European people, they love building circles. Like you were saying, they love the circle, they love the curve. And why would they build round towers if the churches were square? They're built with different stones. They're definitely from a different period. Well, funny enough, I started putting this idea out there very innocently on Irish Archaeological and Antiquities forums. To say, it wasn't under my own name, to say I was attacked would be an understatement. It was like organized. You could see people who had never posted on this forum suddenly arrive out of nowhere to say, this is the most stupid thing I've ever heard. Those things were built by Christian monks. The technology didn't exist before Christians came to Ireland to build those kinds of structures. And then I'd say, well, why are they circular when everything else the Christians built in Ireland was square? And you would get word salad. But the most weird thing was, if I posed a question like that, they'd go silent for a few hours, and then they'd all come back with the same answer, as if they had a briefing or a meeting offline to decide that they all had the same answer. So if that's going on in a small country like Ireland, which is very insignificant in the scheme of things, what on earth is going on here in a place like, like you were saying, in the United States, no one knows about those mounds and stuff. Let me tell you something. I always say to people, when you wake up, start with a blank slate. The things you were told were evil, don't assume that. They may be a Christian viewpoint, or they may be a government viewpoint. Start from and then examine it yourself. The same thing with history. I'm starting to wonder if there's even huge sections of our history that don't even exist and were made up and put into the history books. For instance, the Middle Ages don't make any sense. The Middle Ages apparently didn't exist. Maybe Charlemagne. I'll give you another example of this guy, the head of Irish Antiquities. He starts off his thing by saying, the greatest thing that ever happened in Ireland was that St. Patrick arrived. St. Patrick never existed. He was invented by a bishop in the 8th century who commissioned a monk to create an Irish evangelist. And that's on Wikipedia, and even Wikipedia admits that. And then they say, but we shouldn't take this as literal. He probably did exist. He probably did exist. I would say to you, don't even believe the history they've taught you in schools. Really, can you verify anything beyond your grandparents? And I know that sounds very paranoid, but I can tell you for a fact, there's huge gaps in history that are just not there or don't match timelines. I don't even think Charlemagne probably even existed. I think these were invented by the Vatican, a lot of these things, in order to make Europe sound more Christian and more Romanized than it actually was. Because remember, when you own a nation's history, you own the nation. And the proof of that is the Native American Indians. They're basically the Native American Indian culture that we think is powwows and all that stuff, medicine and all that kind of thing, that was invented by whites about 100 years ago. So don't believe history. Get out there in the field and start looking for yourself.
It's interesting what you guys say about circle structures, because I started to realize that everything, churches, houses, everything is built in squares. And I started to look at the flow of energy. In a circle, energy flows. In a square, it actually blocks it from flowing. So we're living in houses and in homes, and even going to worship in buildings where there's no flow of energy, but actually sort of dead energy. So I did realize the whole thing about circles quite earlier. And another thing about the Vatican, I wanted to bring this up. A very interesting name, the Vatican, because you have Cain in the Bible, the vat of Cain. It's quite interesting. I do know that the series Twilight, there's a part where they go, they go to where the ancients are. And this is all about the Vatican. It's all encoded about the Vatican and the Order of the Black Sun within the series Twilight.
I think, Thomas has given some great advice, and Sarah alike, because I really do think we are thinking people. We're all here because we are thinking people, and we don't believe everything we're told. That's why, we've all gathered here today. And I think it really does start by looking at who says what and why. Like Thomas said, half of it is just, all Christians banding together. And there's quite a few of you may know, I've actually been banned by all of the churches that surround Avebury by the vicar. Yeah? The last woman, yay! Yeah? Because they they are frightened of people like us going in and asking questions, you know? And I think the more that we do that, then that's where we can get our power back from. The more we find out about our ancient holy history, as I call it, then the more we find out about ourselves. And yes, I think we can really, really change, because I truly believe in the ripple effect. You know, one person says something and passes that information on, etc., etc., and before you know it, you've got loads of people going in and saying, you know, what is in Cambridge? I go to my local museum and I say, okay, I want to find this artifact. I want to go in this. They go, oh, I don't know, you know, you can't do that. You can, it's your right. So I think we need to voice that. We need to become more active and literally knock on doors and push buttons and then find out who we are and where we're going. And so I love hassling the system like that. I love going to the museum and saying, I hear about this operation that happened at Stonehenge. I hear about this, I hear about that, and mooching around and trying to find out the truth, because at the end of the day, that's what we are. We're truth seekers trying to find the truth.
We definitely are all rebels here. I get called a lot of horrible stuff, some dark evil, which is the most recent one. I'm really good. I don't believe what people tell me. I don't believe what was written, you know, given by religions and stuff like that. I've always been one to go and explore stuff, and even sometimes, you know, go explore very out there stuff and talk about it, whether it's dimensions or just experiences in general. And I really like doing that. That's one of the things that in life I like doing. I like going places where other people refuse to because they're too scared, because they think that just doesn't conform to the standards of society. So it's something that I live my life doing, is breaking boundaries around myself and bringing that information to people. And I think that this in society, they've got everybody sort of programmed to go to work every day, you know, or go to school or do whatever. They are, and they're living in these small boxes where they're living in these sort of rituals of enslavement every single day, and they're not questioning anything. They're not questioning their history. They're not questioning their religions. They're not questioning, you know, why they're having these boring everyday lives that are taking their soul energy, that are soul sucking from them. They're not questioning anything, and that's quite a sad thing. So I want to encourage people just to explore things in life, to be creative, to really break out of the box, to demand answers, to, you know, go even in your communities, go to those who lead your communities and really say, hey, why aren't you guys helping the homeless? Why are you guys imposing these laws on us? Why are you imposing these rules on us? Really get out of the box, explore other beliefs, explore other things. And I think that this is very quite empowering in life.
Irreverence is the key to insurgency. A guy with a PhD after his name is just 3 letters, you know. It doesn't give them a piled higher and deeper. Don't assume this irreverency thing. I think I'm a great fan of political incorrectness. I think it's a lot of like today, Matt might have seen this. You know, all these sex scandals that are coming out. Stephen Hawking has been accused of assaulting a woman, and on one of the Facebook groups that I'm on, someone said, well, how did he manage that? And like that, one of my Facebook friends comes out with WD-40. Terribly politically incorrect. But guess what? Yeah. You see, instantly his mystique of you cannot question him is gone. The whole thing is broken down. Anyone who's ever been in the military or in a combat situation, they're always taking fun and making fun of each other, taking the piss. We have to learn how to take a piss of our controllers, because remember, the jester is the one in the court who gets to die of old age after all the others have assassinated each other. He's the one who can mock the king and live, so feck him if they can't take a joke.
That's why I'll be dressing up as a witch with, and posting pictures like that. Being rebellious.
Wow, that's hard to follow, Thomas and Sarah. But yeah, I think you're right. I think you've got to have a sense of humour. I think that people, we do need that. We do need that in life. It's about the love, the light and the laughter as well. And sometimes it can be a bit, worrying about, the whole conspiracy thing. I mean, I kind of dip in and out of conspiracy. So for me, it's really kind of good coming here because it takes me out of my megalithic comfort zone. And I always come away with learning something. So for me, it's been great to be a part of AwakeCon because, I get to meet people, hear different views, and listen to some great speakers like Tony Toppin. And so for me, it's about sharing, and I've been glad to share today.
Basically, that was it. About conspiracy theory, I'm an old-fashioned conspiracy theorist. I make absolutely no apology for that, but I might say something that might upset people. I'm absolutely not a truther. I'm not looking for the absolute truth because everyone's truth is different. And remember, it's a journey and not a destination. And when you think you have the absolute truth, that's why I hate that term, because that's kind of fascistic. Oh, I know the truth. That's not what that is. I may never find out. Like there's definitely real conspiracies out there that I'm very fascinated by. I'll probably never find out the truth, but I don't care. They serve. Remember, conspiracies exist to serve to remind you that they don't own you. That's really what the purpose is. And people who are violently opposed to the idea, that's why they made the term conspiracy theorist a slur, and they use shows like the X-Files and stuff like that to mock people who question the government, because it's the same thing as in the Middle Ages when they call someone a witch.
And this is the thing with religion, it's saying that one God for all. This is a problem. It's taken away your own unique divine walk with God and the God within yourself. And this is it. They've molded a whole bunch of sheep or cattle or whatever you want to call them into this, quote, worshiping this one God. And in the end, what you're really worshiping is the heads of these religions who are taking your money and taking your soul energy and exploiting you on every single level.
Yeah. Wow. Yep. Gosh, I don't know what to say, actually, so I'm going to hand it over to Thomas because he's always got something good to say. There you go, Thomas.
And we started off with misogyny, and here they give me the mic. Yeah, this has been a fantastic event. Everyone has been lovely here. I've met lots of new friends here, I'm sure, and the guys who've organised it and ladies have been fantastic. And it's one of the best events I've been to, only based, I spoke in front of 500, 600 people. I've actually enjoyed this more because I feel like I'm in a kind of a much more relaxed environment. And there's a different energy here. If this is the future of like conferences, then we're on the good path. So thank you, all of you, for coming.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank Maria, Sarah and Thomas for that brilliant trilogue. I hope you all enjoyed it. Speakers apart from him now, we have Tajinder Gill, we have Maria Wheatley, we have Thomas Sheridan, we have Sarah Adams. So who'd like to kick things off with a question? Anybody? Niall? Niall always has to. You can't have we have to have a Q&A with Niall.
Yeah, what were you saying about history when you were on there, right, a little bit, just a minute ago, right? One of the things I discovered when I went to India was how to count to 10 in Hindi and how similar it was to Irish. Right, so I'll give you an example. In Hindi, it's ek do tin char panch say sat at no das. In Irish, ein do... Yeah, Eindo Tree, Kuikshe, Shoktok Nide. 7, 8, 9, 10, Satdak Nodas, Shoktok Nide. They sound closer to each other than English does to German. So I'm wondering whether there was any kind of pre-British, pre-Irish or Celtic connection with the Indian subcontinent. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Indo-European, that's where it came from. These were tribes that developed out in the Bronze Age in the steppes in southern Russia, and you'll see this commonality all over again. There's things like spirals. There's gods are very similar. You have like Indra in the Vedic is very similar to Dunar and Thor, and Lu in the Irish and the Norse. You have Bran. You have Brahmavati, I think the name of the raven god or goddess. You have the Morrigan in the Irish. Now, why this came about, these people were very advanced for one reason. They had chariots. And on the steppes, you could go vast distances on a chariot. And you will see chariots play an integral part in all Indo-European folklore. The discussion in the Bhagavad Gita between Arjuna and Krishna takes place in a chariot. You'll have British, Irish, folklore devoted to chariots. The Norse and the proto-Vikings, like the Goths and the Grets, they treated their ships like chariots, and that came from a very ancient ancestral memory of the Indo-European tribes. There's loads of connections like that. Like I always say, the real history is mythology, but also so is language. And there was no Germanic influence in Ireland. But even the Germanic tribes, if you go back far enough, they have Vedic connections as well. And that's why we all come from basically a part in southern Russia, funny enough, where Stalingrad and all those places are, which is kind of ironic when you think that was a decisive thing in World War II.
Does anyone shall I go on, or do any of you, the others, want to respond to Niall's question? Okay, hands up for another question, ladies and gentlemen. This gentleman here.
Hi, I was interested to find out about Maria's high moon theory, and Thomas has also got a theory about the 99 moons, and I wondered if you had tried to marry them together to see if there's any connection there.
Well, you don't know about my 99 theory, but you go ahead yourself.
Yeah, well, it's been known by sort of astronomers about the night of the high moon. It's the opposite, really, of the summer solstice, which is the light days, and it's when the moon is really high in the sky. And loads of ancient sites worldwide were aligned to that lunar event. As well. And because another side of that is how the moon, we know, when it's close or far away, is called perigee or apogee. Perigee is when it's close, apogee is when it's further away. And at these times, we have things like high tides, don't we? And spring tides, or king tides, as they were often called. And on an inner level as well, that kind of reacts to the earth energies. I think the original builders of some of the sites like Avebury, which has a very similar alignment to the high moon, and in Callanish is the opposite. It's when the moon goes quite low on the southern horizon, for example. And has anyone been to Callanish? Callanish is amazing for its lunar example, and I'll pass over in a minute, because they were concerned with the moon's most southerly moon set, and it would go across a beautiful mountain range, sculpted like a sleeping goddess. So the moon would go over like her breasts, her belly, her feet. It would then move around to the center of the stone circle, and if I was stood with my hands out in the middle of the stone circle, the moon is so low I'd be touching each side of the moon. So you become the man or woman in the moon, and as if that isn't beautiful enough, because of the low angle, it would make me, if I was stood in the moon, become twice as large and expand. And that was discovered by Margaret Curtis. So I think there's a lot to the high moons to do with the earth energies, the eclipses. I think it's a whole large cycle. But I'll hand you over now to Thomas and the 99 moons.
Yeah, it's just something I came up with that could be bullshit, but it could be interesting too. It's definitely something that when I love spreadsheets and I love databases. I just enjoy making them, and they're kind of fun. And when I was collecting data for my book, Defeat the Demons, a lot of people had contacted me by then because they'd already read Puzzling People. And I just asked them random questions about, because I was researching for the next book on their effect, the effects of psychopathy on them. And I asked them, when did you have your bad experience? And they all said, 2009, between the spring and the autumn. It either happened in the spring or it either happened in the autumn. Without exception, I would have to say none of them said any other day. An emotional crisis, their business was stolen from them. It seemed to be something seemed to happen. So picking the meridian point in that, I said, can there be a lunar calendar effect to that? And I worked out half just like a noetic thing. I didn't even go, and I says, what if it's 99 lunar cycles? And I predicted that, and in summer 2016 there would be major changes for other people in the world, but not the ones who had been damaged in the 2009 one, because it roughly works out about 8 years depending on the cycle. And some years you have 2 moons, some years less. And sure enough, what happened in summer 2016? You had the rise of Trump, and you had Brexit. So, and then these people are now in the state that we were in back in 2009. They're struggling against reality. They're waking up as happened. So it was just something I came up with. There seems to be good anecdotal evidence to it, but I haven't. It was based primarily on the fact that everyone had the same thing happen at the same time, and I was looking for a secular event, and that was the one that matched it. So that's where that came from.
And interestingly enough, that was in 2010 when the moon last rose above the Heelstone as well. So it does. I'm sure there's these correlations because the moon does affect our consciousness. You know, so it stands to reason.
Just quickly to add to this. One of the things you have to get out of is the idea that something happens and instantly and changes instantly. Nothing in the universe instantly happens. Everything builds up. Everything is an analog sine wave. And remember, if a major event takes place at the top, this is only me causing this, it made me paranoid. The Welshman is sabotaging me. But the top of the sine wave didn't begin at the top of the sine wave. It happened earlier on as the sine wave was and this is what gives people the ability to get ahead in business, to get ahead in everything. They notice the changes as the sine wave begins to come up from the bottom. And they notice these things. They notice the world is changing, behavior in people is changing, and all kinds, and they're ready for it when it happens. Rather than the ones who have like the Babylon mind, I call it, and they get instantly hit with the shock. I knew it was coming before Brexit and Trump came. I knew it was coming, and I said, hold on to your ass, because there's going to be so many people are going to be rattled by this, because they're not going to be able to handle it, because they were not watching the growth in the sine wave. We handled it better because we were on that growth. We'd already asked prior to the sine wave coming up, something is not right with the world. And that's what the beauty, the ones who, you'll find the people who are the most damaged by these things are the ones most wired into the system. So always pay attention to shifts in society and try to follow them, and even in behavior of people around you, and you will notice that it's leading towards something. So always remember that it doesn't just go on and off. The Great Awakening was always going to be a slow sine wave. Nothing in the universe happens like that. Even a lightning bolt, it's a build-up of forces and then it goes bang.
Anybody else? Any questions? Gentleman over there. Oh, lady, apologies. So you just with a hat and everything. I thought it's my eyesight. Sorry.
I was really intrigued about you talking about the ravens at the Tower of London earlier. My son, who's 6, actually still goes to mainstream school currently, but he came home the other week and told me about the ravens in the tower. And I was thinking, well, why are they teaching kids this of 6 years old? And also, what is going on with the ravens at the Tower of London? And what are they used for? What kind of occult meaning is there? And because I know that there's a bit of a legend about one of the kings saying about when they leave the tower. But I felt the fact they're putting this into 6-year-olds' minds is something that we need to pay attention to and also understand properly.
I don't want to keep hogging the mic, and I hope I'm not being rude. But like the thing with the ravens is that ravens are one of the animals that human beings are very connected to. before burials happened, this is why when they find bones in ancient tombs, they don't find toe bones or they don't find finger bones. They used to do a thing called excarnation. They would put people on top of a rack, and the ravens and the carrion, the crows, used to eat their flesh. And this is how we got the Valkyries and the Morrigans and the idea of the raven carrying the soul to the other world. And they could carry off the fingers, but they couldn't carry off that's why we never find finger or toe bones in these burial pots inside where the ones that we actually know are megalithic tombs. The Tower of London one is interesting for two reasons, and Maria, you know this as well. A few years ago, I think it was 2012, the ravens came back to Stonehenge for the first time in 400 years. So you ask yourself, what's the significance of that? And that's pretty heavy.
When did they come back?
I think it was, don't quote me, 2011, I'm not sure, but it was only a few years ago. And they had been missing for something like 400 or 500 years. And funny enough, we were there when they showed up, remember? We were filming in the circle, yeah.
When the tree got chopped down, the big tree, the holy tree over there. Sorry, is that when the holy tree got chopped down over there?
It might have been. Wasn't that at Glastonbury? Yeah. But anyway, it's a very... You remember, I think it ties into the fact that we're discovering our roots as Europeans. You see, they don't want us discovering our roots as Europeans because they say it's racist. Skinheads are into that. Neo-Nazis are into that. Feckum, you should be allowed to enjoy your heritage just as much as anyone else. It doesn't mean you're disrespecting another. The biggest thing that they have a fear of is Europeans saying, hey, guess what, I'm an indigenous person. That's what the biggest fear they have is. And the raven is tied into that.
Taj was going to ask Sarah a question about the beast, and that was postponed. Can you answer now, Sarah, please?
Oh, that's a long answer there. So, it's, about the lower consciousness, that in most sacred writings it says that humanity is functioning at lower consciousness. So we have the beast in the Bible, and specifically in Revelations. Then we have King Nebuchadnezzar, who, he walked and talked with God, and then he sort of, I guess, became a bit egotistical and he was thrown down and became a beast in the field. And I don't believe that he shapeshifted into a little beast. I believe he was thrown down from higher consciousness into lower consciousness. So I have done a bit of work on that, by the way. You can find some YouTube videos, and I will explain this to you after, because the answer on this would be quite extensive. Thank you.
Right, anybody else? One at the front there? Someone at the front.
Sarah, you mentioned something about Stranger Things earlier and about the 11 dimensions. Can you explain something more about that?
Yes. So in Stranger Things, the girl in there, her name is 11. Now, if you look at the High Priestess Tarot, she sits between two pillars, which creates the 11. And in Stranger Things, she can access both the seen and the unseen. She represents the High Priestess, and I believe that the boys in there that help her out represent something such as archangels. She also represents the Mary Magdalene. There are a few interesting symbolic things happening within that series that very much correlate to some articles that just came out saying that humans or humanity interacts with 11 dimensions and they don't even know it.
Anybody else? Don't be shy. You must have one in there somewhere. Tony. Always rely on you, can't I? Either Niall or Tony.
Right, it's about conspiracy. Trump. Yeah, I take what you said there, Thomas. But I'm not confident that chap is really doing us a service in a conscious way. I think he is a bit of a loose cannon. But I'd like to... people like Alex Jones, Infowars, supported him madly, thought he was going to drain the swamp and expose a lot of the things that we're interested in. I don't think he will, but there's still a chance that he can be a bit of a loose cannon. But the point I wanted to make about him, and I'd like the thoughts of each of you on it, are you all aware of the board game called the Illuminati game? Yeah, okay. There's a couple of cards in that. There's a Trump-like character who's got his face screwed up in anger, and the title of that card is Enough is Enough. Now, when you look at things like Anonymous, Occupy, Black Lives Matter, for instance, some of the big things in the States that are being promoted by people like George Soros, another major player who appears to be working against the system, but he's part of that system. I wonder if the enough is enough card is another angle that's being played out where the same people control both sides. I'll just chuck in, the other card I'd chuck in is the agent in place card. It's a picture of someone who resembles Alex Jones with an old-fashioned walkie-talkie with an aerial up. Leaning over on the agent in place. So there's a lot of control going on, I think, and maybe the Illuminati card game is some kind of a template that's being used. It was based on Robert Anton Wilson's book, The Illuminatus Trilogy.
Well, first of all, Robin Anton Wilson, Raw, was a genius, and he was not a conspiracy theorist. People think he was. He was making fun of it. He was too intelligent to be like that. He was working, and he was an agent. No, I wouldn't say an agent. Another word. He was an agent of change. He was trying to shift human consciousness. The man was a genius, by the way. Excuse me. The Illuminati board game is shit. It's a really boring game. The artwork is crap, and that's the way I feel about it. People also forget and I like game. I play a lot of games. I love board games and stuff. People forget that. It's just a game, firstly, and secondly, they miss all the cards where nothing has come true. So it's very easy to find a kind of confirmation bias in these things and say, oh, it's like the Bible, oh, this is this or this is that. The Illuminati card game has become the books of revelations for people in the conspiracy movement, and probably that's its most dangerous thing of all, because I think being a wonderful Discordian that Robert Anton Wilson was, he deliberately did it for that reason. So you've been tricked into that. So don't play too much into that. I think that was that was his trickster kind of mentality. Secondly, Trump, I don't care. I don't care. I just love the chaos. I'm a Discordian myself. I love chaos because, like, this the way I see it is, look, if I wanted a new laptop and I was walking down the street, Trump is the guy who threw the concrete brick through the shop window and I stole the laptop. That's all he is. I mean, I don't care what laws he passes. I'm just loving every single second of him causing chaos. I quite like Alex Jones. I don't have a problem with Alex Jones. He's an entertainer. Always take him as an entertainer. Agents in place. I'll tell you who the agents in place are. They're people who tell you that the earth is flat. That's who the agents in place are. Because they're the ones who actually exist to make the rest of us look like idiots. They're the ones who say mountains are big trees. They're the ones who are the first ones to call other shills or the shills themselves, because you're sitting there trying to tell somebody about something really important, like, say, charity, and then some idiot comes along and says, by the way, the earth is flat. That ship has been sunk by the flat earth torpedo. Do you want to know who the real shills are? They are. But they're passive shills. They're what Trotsky called useful idiots. That's what they are.
Hail Eris.
So I found something out in the Book of Revelations that I found this, series of verses that I thought was really interesting, and it says it says, the abomination of desolation will sit in a holy place. Now, if we look at the White House, it's like a temple, so it would be considered a holy place. And I thought about Obama sitting over the nation in the White House. And then it says the trumpets will be sounded and then the end will come. So I think the end as not in a bad end, but some sort of illumination. And the trumpets, you had Pence, and they were seen all over the world. They were sounded all over the world because they were on radio, on TV. Everybody saw them. So I thought that's quite interesting. to move on to this flat earth thing in the United States now, you can, in coffee shops and restaurants, they now have these little things for donations, and one says jars for donations, one says flat earth, and one says round earth, and you can put your money in for either the flat or the round.
It's funny, you're talking about looting. I grew up in a tough neighbourhood in Dublin. There used to be riots all the time. And a better analogy was that the rioting I have a theory why rioting stopped. When I was a kid, everybody had prams for the babies. And then it switched over to baby buggies. You try and get a 26-inch colour television on a baby buggy. You can't. And I actually, there's a conspiracy theory for you. They brought in buggies to make riding more difficult.
We've got time for 2, maybe 3 more, depending on the lengths of the questions and the answers. Niall.
This year's been interesting because we've had this left-right thing going on. We've had kind of like Paul Joseph Bloody Watson getting his knickers in a twist about how conservatism is the new punk and all that. We've had the social justice warriors, we've had the flat earthers, we've had all the post-Russell Brand things. And I've actually found myself almost being taken in by this. And the antidote was Robert Anton Wilson. I just went back to listening to him because it was all about basically seeing the world from my own subjective reality tunnel, thinking of all these things as just reality tunnels. There's all maps, none of it is territory. But I've come to the conclusion that this conference, I was dubious and I was kind of expecting that it might have been a bit flakier than it actually was, and it has turned out to be quite down to earth. Do you think today, or this weekend, is kind of like an adulthood, if you like, in the alternative community has been triggered by these attempts at divide and rule that have happened, like what I've just mentioned?
I don't really know how to answer that because the whole purpose of my conference was to be different from the other conferences anyway. Because of the events and conferences I went to this year, not naming any names or any conferences that I have been to, but I didn't really find what I was looking for, I guess, as well as far as answers and speakers and things like that. So I thought I would hold my own event with the people that I connect with, and people that I've been following for years, and let you all make your own decisions about whether you connect with these speakers as well. So if you have connected with them in some way, then that's great. And that's the whole purpose of the conference, really.
It's probably a short one. You just mentioned that you don't want to name any conferences that you've had a bad time at. This is the first actual UK conference I've been to. I normally go to others elsewhere. It's nice and easy to come to the ones in the UK. Anyone want to just shout out some good ones that I should look at, that I should maybe look forward to next year and for the years beyond and whatnot?
Yeah, the Megalomithomania one in Glastonbury, I'm at that, and there's loads of other people there as well. So if you want and also Ian Crane's AV conferences are fantastic. They're Ian Crane, the AV8, and they're in May. If you were bringing someone in who knew nothing about this scene, I'd say the AV conferences. Matt is there, and Ian does an amazing job. I've got a lot of great respect for the man, and he really understands how to sell alternative ideas to people. And you get a similar audience that you get to hear, and it's like you hang out with the speakers and you stay in a beautiful resort hotel in the countryside, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a big thing. And yeah, I stopped drinking last year, but there's these guys, and what's Paul Spence? He won't talk to me anymore because we used to be drinking till like 2 o'clock in the morning and then have a fist fight and hug each other saying, "I love you, you bastard." But that's the kind of thing it was. It was like loads of fun. And so that one and the Megalomithomania ones and anything like that. I think there's definitely something happening. Look, don't be closed-minded to anything. Go out there and have a look. I went to conferences like your man here that I thought were flaky, and I suddenly found out, oh my God, I just learned a lot from a couple of people. Look, there's there's perils of wisdom in everything, even if you only learn what you don't want to be into. Yeah.
And there's Origins. In November, I think, run by Andy Collins and Hugh Newman of Megalithomania. That's very good.
And Ireland is crap. There's nothing there.
Can I recommend? Can I recommend the Probe conference, Probe International? Yeah, that's a good one. Right, I think this might have to be the last one. Any hands up? Hands up, anyone? Hands up! Right. I literally got to pretend to shoot people before I get people to stick their hands up. Thank you very much, sir. Here you go. Last question.
Ron, you're talking about energy vampires. Sarah was, and I think Thomas was. Sorry, you're talking about energy vampires earlier. And I was just wondering whether that was the main source of the energy that the people who are in control, that's how they get their power. Is that the main way is through children mainly? That's obviously the youth energy is...
Well, Sarah's the vampire.
It's so, it's so important to them. Is that their main source? And if you take that source away, does their power massively diminish? I mean, if you have in theory, you could, I don't know, have control over every kid's home and if you could stop that from happening, basically, could you stop their power?
I would say that they do rituals and there are other things they do to gather energy. That's not the only thing, but that is one of the main sources of it. It's definitely up there. At least for me, I do feel that protecting the children and keeping children from harm and from being harmed in that way would definitely help a lot on every single level. But would that totally stop their source? They are like pirates. They are vampires. They're stealing energy from others to feel what's depleted within themselves. It's almost like you not having blood and you needing a blood transfusion. Energy for me is the purest form of blood. Energy is almost like it's in a way sometimes more precious than blood, because your blood has a charge of energy. Without the charge of energy, your blood's useless. I don't think that it would entirely stop them, but I do think that would stop a lot of it.
Yeah, everything Sarah says is correct. Look, in your own life, there's people who are going to make you feel good and they're going to make you feel down, even just by being around them. And then there's people who are neutral. Avoid the ones who are bringing you down, because this is a sad thing and a difficult thing to understand. There's lots of energy vampires who are decent people. They don't know that they're sucking the energy out of you. They're constantly complaining, this kind of thing. That's why I say get rid of your television. Your television is the greatest. You want to do an experiment in your home. If you've got a TV in your home and it's on like a lot, like most people's homes, you throw your TV out. I guarantee you, if you put a temperature gauge in your living room, the temperature actually grows up. That's not a joke. That's not a joke. And it's not because you're moving around more, because you'll be reading. It's actually physically changing your psychic environment.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, please could you put your hands together for Sarah Adams, Thomas Sheridan, Maria Wheatley, Tajinder Gill. Thank you. Thank you. And we have, in his absence, we still have an empty chair on the stage for David Shaler. I'm sure he's here in spirit, if not in mind. Now, it's been quite a roller coaster ride this weekend, especially since there are several people I've spoken to here who are at their first ever conference, their first ever British conference, the first ever. I hope that you really will get the bug and come to others, like I did when I first went to my conference. I hope you've really enjoyed it. I hope we've given you really something to think about and to inspire you and to become part of this community. I really, really do. So for those of you who've come here for the first time, thank you very much. And for the rest of you, thank you too for coming again and once again supporting a really noble enterprise within this community. This is a brand new franchise. This is the first ever conference of this franchise. Hopefully, this will be the first of many. There are some conferences that come and go. This one, I hope, will stay. So that's great. Thank you very much to everyone. involved. And it's been very much a family effort too, because Tajinder's the organiser, but his mum, his sisters have been working behind the tea store. So thank you to them. And of course, the man for whom this conference is his brainchild, the one and only Tajinder Gill. And Mr. Gill, I would like to say a few words. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mr. Gill would like to say a few words himself, I believe, now.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for coming this weekend. I really don't know why I came up with starting my own conference, but I guess it was an idea I came up with, and Sarah thought it was a good idea, so I'll sort of just go along with what Sarah says, I guess. But I hope you've all enjoyed the weekend. We've had some great speakers. I want to thank all of the speakers who've come this weekend and given some great talks, as they always do. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I don't know, there will probably be another AwakeCon next year. I don't know where it will be. It will either be on this side of the Atlantic or the other side of the Atlantic, depending on my future plans. So I hope you've Well, I hope to see you again at the next AwakeCon event anyway, so thank you all.